And even when Clint was starting to smoke pot and things like that, I wasn't using any drugs. Younger brother had euthanized his older brother as requested after a horrible accident where the brother was going to be paralyzed forever.
At 62, Graham Norton finally confessed. After decades interviewing showbiz's biggest names, the sharp-witted talk show icon revealed the 6 celebrity guests he simply couldn't stand. From off-camera outbursts to cringeworthy interviews, Norton held nothing back. And yes, some names will shock even his most loyal fans. Millions fondly remember The Andy Griffith Show as a warm depiction of small-town Americana. Yet, the atmosphere behind the scenes wasn't always as sunny, particularly concerning Frances Bavier, who played the beloved Aunt Bee, while her on-screen persona exuded gentle affection, baked pies and comforting smiles. Bavier's real-life personality was far more intricate. Among the cast and crew, she was known as a consummate professional, but also someone who maintained a cautious, at times frosty, distance from others. Ron Howard, who portrayed young Opie Taylor, has reflected on Bavier's quiet and reserved nature in interviews. He noted she very much kept to herself during filming, not participating in the lighthearted pranks and camaraderie that bonded the rest of the cast. Howard, who grew up on set and experienced the production's rhythms firsthand, recalled that Bavier didn't seem particularly fond of children. While he never accused her of unkindness, he gently admitted he didn't think she enjoyed being around children much. It was a subtle yet telling insight, pointing to a disconnect between Bavier and her younger co-stars. Despite the lack of warmth, Howard never criticized her acting. In fact, like many others, he praised her professionalism. She arrived prepared, delivered her lines flawlessly, and never faltered in her performance. But the emotional distance lingered, and for a child actor like Howard, it was hard not to notice. Their on-screen interactions may have conveyed maternal love and warmth, but that nurturing energy vanished when the cameras stopped rolling. Ron Howard wasn't the only one who noticed Bavier's standoffish nature. Other cast and crew members described her in far more direct, sometimes critical terms. While no one disputed her talent or dedication to her craft, she was often called moody and temperamental. Behind the scenes, working with her required careful navigation, as she was known to take offense easily and could lash out when her comfort or dignity felt threatened. One crew member even called her a landmine, a vivid metaphor for her unpredictable temperament. In particular, she could be incredibly sensitive to direction, especially regarding blocking and camera positioning. A story circulated of her becoming upset if asked to move even 3 inches to accommodate a shot. To some directors, this was baffling and frustrating, as such small adjustments were routine for any actor. But for Bavier, it seemed a matter of personal pride or perhaps a defense mechanism. One crew member recalled she would blow a fuse over minor adjustments, making it difficult to get through certain scenes smoothly. Still, many who worked with her acknowledged that Bavier's exacting standards might have stemmed from deep artistic pride. She took her role seriously, bringing a sense of formality to Mayberry's otherwise relaxed environment. She believed in decorum, discipline, and order values that may have clashed with the laid-back, improvisational style sometimes governing the set. While others laughed and joked between takes, Bavier seemed to operate on a more internalized level, fully immersed in her character's emotional weight. Some speculated her aloofness stemmed from personal insecurity or even loneliness. Unlike her younger co-stars, many of whom enjoyed the spotlight and thrill of fame, Bavier came from a stage background and had spent years refining her craft in more serious classical roles. To her, the sitcom may have seemed a less noble medium, even if it brought her unprecedented fame. In that light, her temperament may have been less about ego and more about holding herself and everyone around her to higher standards. Importantly, no one accused Bavier of malice. Even when tensions flared, she never acted out of cruelty or spite. Rather, her moodiness seemed rooted in a deep seriousness about the work and an unwillingness to lower her standards for anyone. I bet that didn't make her easy to approach. 4. A child like Ron Howard, eager to learn and bond with his adult co-stars. Her cool demeanor was understandably off-putting, while Griffith and other cast members like Don Knotts were playful and approachable. Bavier remained an enigma. She seldom mingled socially with the cast outside of filming and didn't engage in the banter that often builds camaraderie on a long-running show. It's likely she preferred solitude or simply didn't feel the need to form close friendships on set. As a result, while her character, Aunt Bee, was seen as Mayberry's emotional heart, the actress behind her remained emotionally removed from the Mayberry family off-camera. Interestingly, in her later years, Bavier reportedly expressed regret over how she had distanced herself from her co-stars. In a phone call to Andy Griffith before her death, she allegedly apologized for her behavior, acknowledging she had been difficult and distant during their time together. Griffith accepted her apology with grace, reportedly saying he always respected her talent and appreciated what she brought to the show. This late-life reconciliation hinted at a deeper truth behind Bavier's tough exterior. Perhaps she struggled with vulnerability, or perhaps she felt misunderstood in an environment that prized affability over introspection. Whatever the cause, her final years seemed to bring a degree of reflection and softness that had been absent during the show's heyday. Frances Bavier remains one of the most iconic maternal figures in television history, thanks to her pitch-perfect portrayal of Aunt Bee. But behind the camera, she was a far cry from the sweet, apron-wearing housekeeper millions adored. She was complex, reserved, perfectionistic, and emotionally guarded. She demanded much of herself and those around her, often at the cost of personal connection. Ron Howard's directorial style has long been praised for its collaborative, actor-friendly nature, marked by his calm demeanor and deep respect for storytelling. But even the most even-keeled directors occasionally face difficult personalities on set. One of the more challenging experiences in Howard's early directing career came during the making of Cocoon 1985. The sci-fi drama which told the story of elderly people rejuvenated by extraterrestrial forces became a box office hit and critical success. However, behind the scenes, Howard later revealed that working with veteran actor Wilfrid Brimley proved to be one of the more trying aspects of the production. Brimley, a well-known character actor even before Cocoon, brought a gravitas and blunt authenticity to every role he played. His no-nonsense, cowboy-like attitude, both on-screen and off, was a hallmark of his identity. But that same unfiltered approach that made him a compelling performer also made him a difficult collaborator at times, especially for a young director like Howard, who was still proving himself after transitioning from a child actor to a serious filmmaker. Howard admitted in later interviews that Brimley could be tough, describing his demeanor as challenging and sometimes confrontational. Despite Brimley only being about 18 years older than Howard, the actor carried himself with a stern, old-school presence that could feel intimidating. At the time of filming, Brimley was only in his early 50s, but his weathered face, gruff voice, and commanding presence gave the impression of someone decades older. He had a strong sense of how he wanted things done and didn't shy away from making his opinions known. According to Howard, Brimley was not openly hostile, but he wasn't exactly warm either. He would challenge decisions, push back on direction, and was particularly vocal if something didn't feel authentic or necessary to him. In essence, he treated Howard not as a rising director, but as a kid who still had to earn his stripes. For Howard, who was in his early 30s and already under immense pressure leading a major studio production, the dynamic with Brimley added a layer of stress that made certain days unpleasant. Yet, Howard never allowed the tension to derail the film. He spoke candidly about how he had to manage Brimley differently than anyone else. It meant adapting his communication style, learning when to stand firm and when to yield, is constantly striving to keep the atmosphere from becoming too tense for the rest of the cast and crew. It was a delicate balancing act, respecting Brimley's instincts while maintaining creative control of the production. Howard emphasized that Brimley's strength as an actor lay in his honesty and naturalism. He wasn't the type to play to the camera or deliver overly theatrical performances. What he brought to the table was a grounded, emotionally raw sensibility and authenticity that, when channeled properly, could elevate a scene beyond what was written on the page. Howard recognized this early on and knew that harnessing Rawness was crucial to the heart of Cocoon. But that didn't make navigating Brimley's strong-willed personality any easier. Brimley's reluctance to suffer fools, combined with his grizzled work ethic, clashed with the more sensitive, team-oriented style that Howard cultivated. The tension wasn't so much about ego as it was about different temperaments, different generations, and different philosophies on filmmaking. Brimley came from a background where you spoke your mind and got on with it, while Howard favored a more inclusive, exploratory approach. Howard never portrayed Brimley as a villain. Far from it. In fact, he often stressed how much he learned from the experience. The key, he said, was understanding that Brimley's obstinance came from a genuine desire to make the movie better. He wasn't difficult for the sake of it. He was protective of the material, passionate about the craft, and committed to delivering truth in his performance. Once, Howard stopped taking the pushback personally and began to see it as part of Brimley's process. Things began to shift. Over time, the mutual respect between director and actor grew, if not into a friendship, then at least into a productive working relationship. Howard learned how to frame ideas in ways that resonated with Brimley, rather than give rigid direction. He'd discuss intentions, motivations, and the emotional core of the scene. This approach allowed Brimley the space to interpret the material, on his own terms, while still aligning with the film's larger vision. That trust paid off. Brimley's performance in Cocoon is often cited as one of his most memorable, and it contributed significantly to the emotional resonance of the film. His portrayal of Ben Luckett, a man rediscovering vitality and purpose late in life, struck a chord with audiences and critics alike. It was a role that required subtlety, depth, and vulnerability, qualities that Brimley possessed in abundance. Even if he made the journey to the screen a little rockier than others, for Howard, the experience became a masterclass in handling difficult personalities without losing sight of the bigger picture. It was a lesson in emotional intelligence, adaptability, and the importance of recognizing the value behind the friction. Sometimes the hardest people to work with are the ones who care the most, and once that's understood, their rough edges can become assets instead of obstacles. In later years, Howard would go on to direct increasingly high-profile projects and become one of Hollywood's most respected directors. While he has worked with countless actors of all temperaments and styles, the challenge of working with Wilfrid Brimley on Cocoon left a lasting impression. It reminded him that leadership isn't just about making decisions. It's about listening, adjusting, and learning how to bring out the best in everyone. Even if the path there is sometimes uncomfortable in the early stages of Ron Howard's transition. From child star to respected director, one of his most formative and intimidating experiences came during the making of the 1980 made-for-TV movie Skyward. The project marked one of his earliest directorial efforts and featured none other than the formidable Bette Davis, a living legend of Hollywood's golden age. For the young director, still trying to prove himself behind the camera, working with Davis wasn't just a challenge. It was a trial by fire. Bette Davis, by the time of Skyward, was decades into a career that had redefined what it meant to be a female actor in Hollywood. With 2 Academy Awards and a reputation for demanding excellence, Davis was revered, feared, and famously uncompromising. She wasn't known for coddling anyone, let alone a fresh-faced director still earning his stripes in the industry. When Ron Howard walked onto the set to helm the project, he wasn't just meeting a seasoned performer. He was confronting a towering figure, whose mere presence could silence a room. Howard would later admit that Davis intimidated him from the moment they met. Her energy, poise, and unwavering confidence instantly put him on edge. While many young directors might have hoped for a bit of mentorship or maternal grace from a veteran actor, Davis offered no such comfort. She didn't meet him with warmth or encouragement. Instead, she addressed him formally, calling him Mr. Howard, a subtle but powerful reminder of the professional distance she intended to maintain. That formal address was no accident. In Davis's world, titles mattered. Respect was earned, not assumed. She had spent decades clawing her way through a brutal industry that often undervalued women. and she wasn't about to hand over deference to someone she viewed as unproven. To her, Ron Howard was not yet a peer. He was a young man with something to prove, and until he did, she would treat him accordingly. Howard, for his part, was polite and respectful, traits that would later become hallmarks of his directing style. But inside, he was deeply unsettled. He later admitted to popping a couple of Tums during the shoot, a humorous but telling confession that revealed just how anxious he was about directing someone of Davis's stature. Every note he gave, every instruction he offered, had to be delivered with precision and confidence, even when he felt anything but. The idea of being corrected, dismissed, or worse, publicly undermined by Bette Davis was enough to make even the most seasoned professional break into a sweat. For Howard, still in his 20s, it was nearly overwhelming. On set, Davis was, in Howard's words, a little hard on him. She questioned his choices, second-guessed directions, and at times seemed to test the limits of his authority. Her actions weren't overtly hostile, but there was an unmistakable edge to their interactions, an underlying skepticism that she never fully tried to hide. For Howard, it felt like he was constantly trying to earn her approval, or at the very least, her cooperation. But despite the tension, there was never any open animosity between them. Davis didn't berate or belittle him. Instead, she offered him something more difficult to grapple with: relentless scrutiny. Every decision he made, she seemed to weigh. Every word of direction she measured. She pushed him to be certain of himself, to lead, not just manage. In a way, she was doing him a favor, though it didn't feel like one at the time. As the production moved forward, the dynamic between them slowly shifted. Howard, determined not to let her see his nerves, doubled down on preparation. He studied every scene, anticipated every problem, and made sure to show up with a plan. Gradually, Davis seemed to take notice. Her tone softened slightly. The Mr. Howard began to fade, replaced by a more informal rapport. Though she never became warm or openly affectionate, she began treating him with a professional respect that had been absent in their first meetings. It's possible that Davis saw something familiar in Howard, a young performer trying to redefine himself in an industry that often resists change. Davis herself had fought for control over her career, battling studios and producers for the right to choose her roles, shape her performances, and be more than just a pretty face on a contract. Howard, in his own way, was doing the same, stepping behind the camera to forge a new path. Knowing full well that some people still saw him as Opie from the Andy Griffith Show, when Ron Howard was cast opposite John Wayne in The Shootist 1976, he found himself facing one of the most intimidating and potentially career-defining challenges of his young life. At just 22 years old, Howard had already spent much of his childhood in the public eye. First as Opie Taylor on the Andy Griffith Show, and then as Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. But this was different. This was a feature film starring one of the most legendary and formidable figures in Hollywood history. John Wayne was not just a movie star. He was a myth, a symbol of American masculinity and the Western genre itself. And according to everything Howard had heard, working with him wasn't exactly a walk in the park by the time The Shootist went into production. Wayne was in the twilight of both his life and career. He had already undergone surgery for lung cancer in 1964, and though he continued acting throughout the 1970s, his health was visibly declining. The Shootist would ultimately be his final film. That alone gave the production a weight that was palpable. But for Howard, the pressure was twofold. Not only was he sharing the screen with an icon, he also had to manage the daunting prospect of collaborating with someone who had a reputation for being gruff, opinionated, and notoriously difficult with young actors. Howard would later admit that he went into the project bracing for impact. He'd heard the stories, Wayne barking at directors, dismissing actors he didn't respect, dominating sets with his larger-than-life presence. Howard expected friction and feared that his relatively youthful demeanor might trigger Wayne's disdain. As he put it, he was screwed, convinced that the Duke would see him as just another lightweight, unworthy of sharing his frame. But what unfolded on set surprised Howard. While the early days of the production were marked by caution and distance, Howard wisely kept a low profile at first. Studying Wayne from afar, the relationship between the two began to evolve in unexpected ways. Wayne, who could indeed be demanding and blunt, didn't come at Howard with the antagonism he had feared. Instead, he seemed to sense the young actor's respect, humility, and work ethic, and that went a long way. Howard never tried to challenge Wayne or assert himself unnecessarily. He understood the delicate power dynamics on set and had no interest in testing boundaries. Instead, he focused on his performance, arriving prepared, listening closely to direction, and delivering his lines with sincerity. Over time, that quiet professionalism began to earn Wayne's attention and then his respect, to Howard's surprise. Wayne eventually took him under his wing. Though not overly affectionate or verbose in his approval, Wayne began offering advice, small compliments, and bits of mentorship. He'd lean in after a take to offer a note or give a subtle nod of approval. Howard later said that Wayne displayed a kind of respect for the work that transcended age. And once he saw that Howard was serious about his craft, he treated him as a colleague rather than a kid. One particular moment stood out to Howard during filming. After watching him perform a scene with quiet intensity, Wayne reportedly walked over and said, "You did good, Ron." For an actor of Wayne's stature, who wasn't known for handing out praise lightly, those 4 words carried enormous weight. It wasn't just approval, it was an anointing. Howard had passed an invisible test. Between scenes, Wayne began sharing war stories from his decades in Hollywood. Stories about directors like John Ford, ruling location shoots, and how he crafted his signature screen presence. Howard listened intently, soaking in every detail. These weren't just anecdotes, they were lessons. Howard realized that Wayne, behind the bluster and bravado, was deeply committed to the art of filmmaking. He cared about the camera, the rhythm of a scene, the arc of a character, and in his own way, he wanted the next generation of actors and filmmakers to carry that same torch. Yet, Wayne's health was always a factor looming in the background. During the filming of The Shootist, he was dealing with the effects of cancer and visibly weakened. But even in his fragile state, he remained fiercely professional. He never used his illness as an excuse and insisted on doing his own stunts, whenever possible, despite the physical toll it took on him. This relentless commitment left an impression on Howard, who would later carry that same ethic into his own directing career. Show up, do the work, give it everything. The dynamic between the two actors continued to deepen throughout production. While they never became close friends in the traditional sense, there was a growing sense of mutual regard. Wayne, always wary of pretension, appreciated Howard's straightforward, earnest approach. Howard, in turn, saw in Wayne a complexity that often went unrecognized by critics, a man who was as vulnerable as he was strong, as introspective as he was commanding. The Shootist itself was a poignant film, telling the story of an aging gunfighter. Facing his final days with quiet dignity, it's hard to watch the film without feeling the echoes of Wayne's own mortality in the role. His performance was restrained, even elegiac, and it marked a dramatic departure from the more brash, confident characters he had played for most of his career. Howard, playing a young man who looks up to Wayne's character, was essentially reflecting their real-life relationship on screen. In many ways, the script became a mirror of their experience, an old legend guiding a young hopeful, each learning something from the other. After filming wrapped, Howard walked away from The Shootist not just with another credit on his resume, but with a newfound confidence and deeper understanding of what it meant to lead a film. Working with Wayne, surviving that emotional gauntlet, and ultimately winning his respect had taught him more than any acting class or directing seminar ever could. It was a masterclass in presence, discipline, and how to navigate egos with humility. Years later, Howard would reflect on the experience with gratitude. He acknowledged the fear he'd felt at the beginning, but also the pride he felt in earning Wayne's approval. It was one of those rare Hollywood encounters where myth and reality collided, and somehow the experience lived up to both. For Howard, The Shootist became more than just another acting job. It was a pivotal moment of personal and professional growth. It reminded him that legends aren't just born, They're made often through perseverance, doubt, and resilience. And that even the most intimidating giants can become mentors when met with respect, patience, and a willingness to learn. What do you think about Ron Howard's experiences with these challenging personalities? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next videos.